Here are 5 major things you need to decide before you start your next campaign, setting, or adventure. There are a lot more, like factions, population density, geography, cultures, and many more details. But these are the big 5 that you have to have before you can start. Number 1, levels of magic. Deciding just how much magic exists in your world can also help shape how your world will view magic in its entirety. How common are cantrips? Can the average person cast magic? Is it outlawed in certain places? All of these things can really establish what kind of role magic plays in your campaign setting. I've found there are roughly 4 types of different magic that you can try and set up for a campaign. I'm sure there's more, but these are the 4. High magic. This is exactly as it sounds. There's high levels of magic everywhere. Common folk know how to cast first level spells. Cantrips are not uncommon by any stretch of the imagination. People are born into magic and have magic innately in them. It's very easy to go to a school and study magic, and the world in its entirety utilizes magic to coexist in the world. This type of setting can mean that your big bad evil guys can have lots and lots of magic too. And lots of magic items. This comes with some interesting problems that your characters might have to face, because when magic is so frequently used in everyday life and everyday situations, it becomes more and more increasingly intricate the higher the levels go. Think of spells, traps, and puzzles that all in some way involve magic. There's going to be more of those existing in a campaign like this. Hell, you might even have some regular creatures like goblins and things that have somehow managed to harness magic on a surface level and can cast cantrips and other certain things. Okay, on the flip side of that is low magic. This is the complete opposite, where the only magic your players might see throughout the entire campaign is coming from them. Perhaps potions exist in this world to some degree and forms of alchemy, but outright magic, arcane texts, tomes, and other sorcerers that can innately cast, maybe they just aren't here. And that's what makes the party extremely special. Maybe even the party themselves have very little magic and you want to play a more martial and melee style of game. Another type is hero magic. The party you intend to put into this campaign become the most powerful magic users ever known. Magic does exist, but is very rare, although your party seems to stumble across it more often than others. In this kind of setting, anything beyond a first level spell and you are going to be considered godly by the common folk. And then there is forbidden magic. That's right, magic is considered a dark art and has been outlawed almost everywhere. This creates an interesting dynamic with when your players use magic in front of common folk and how they react to that. If they use it in a city, could they be arrested or would they be chased out of town, simply attacked? This kind of setting is a little bit more difficult because there's always the threat that people who are trying to help the party might all of a sudden think that they are being manipulated in some way by cursed magic. This type of forbidden magic setting might not just be forbidden by the people because magic is dangerous. It might literally be the structure of magic itself. This is an interesting place to include wild magic. Anytime anybody casts a spell, they have to roll that d20. If they get a 1, they're rolling on the wild magic surge table. And you can take your pick of these tables too, because there's quite a few of them now. No matter what you choose, or even a mix to determine what levels of magic you have in your setting and campaign, deciding this will give you a good idea of the level of power that your players will gain through magic in the world. The second way you can decide and create a campaign is with a theme or feel. This one is typically discussed with your players before you even start playing to really figure out what kind of campaign they want to play in. Perhaps they've recently finished a very long and arduous, gritty campaign and they want something more silly, lighthearted, and fun. Or maybe they did just have a series of one-shots where they've had their fill of silly fun and now they want something more story driven, and maybe they want their character backstories interwoven into the campaign itself. I have recently made a video about this. I'll put a card up above so you can go and check that out. A lot of the time people do want a very clear-cut story when it comes to a campaign, but the theme could always be a little bit different depending on the setting. It's really recommended here to have a good balance of gritty storytelling as well as some lighthearted fun, because you don't always want to get bogged down in really harsh realities. We're all here to have fun and play a game, So remember, we have to have a laugh from time to time. I've found personally that the best themes and the best feels for a campaign setting are ones where the whole world isn't ending, but if the party doesn't act soon, then something dangerous and terrible is going to happen. And a lot of innocent people might suffer. They don't always have to act fast, and they don't always have to act lawful, but they do have to act to protect their own interests in the world. Just remember, the faster and more frequently you make your players and characters react to things that are happening in the world, the more intense the campaign will feel. So whether it's a survival setting, a heist, a mystery, treasure hunt, a MacGuffin chase, or a little bit of monster slaying, you'll need to have at least some seriousness involved. Otherwise, they won't get a sense of satisfaction that anything they did in the world was actually meaningful. Oh, while I've got you here, would you mind clicking that like button and the subscribe too? It helps out a lot more than you realize. I'm just getting started here on YouTube, and I have so many tips, tricks, and tidbits for you to pick up as a dungeon master. Whether you're new or a veteran, all these things are amazing to revise. I also have all stuff up on my Patreon, which you can check out over there. Join as a free member, get access to a whole bunch of stuff. I put out maps, monsters, and magic items every single month. You can follow me everywhere at Critical Mitts. I also have some one-shots up on DM's Guild. You can go and check those out in the link below. Back to the video. The third way to pick your campaign is with gods and pantheons. Typically, this is where certain classes and characters in your world will gain their power from. Clerics, paladins, warlocks, and perhaps even where the sorcerer's bloodline is descended from. These all require that such beings do exist or have existed for them to gain, and it helps your players thematically fit their characters into the world just a little better. Do the gods still exist? Have they recoiled to another plane so that they can't interfere with the goings-on of mortals? How much influence do the gods have over common folk in your world? This is something that you should decide, and you should decide how or where or when or how often common folk of the world dedicate themselves to the gods that you've created. Do they worship them daily, weekly, only on traditional holidays? This shows a level of dedication and how prominent the gods are in your campaign. Are there temples set up for a pilgrimage? Are there evil gods that exist that have cults dedicated to them? You don't need answers for all these things starting out, but it is a good idea to have the one thing in mind. If common folk interact with gods in a specific way, how does your party interact with the gods? Okay, a fourth way to decide how to start your campaign is through tiers of play. There are 4 tiers, and these are level bracket ranges. So tier 1 is level 1 through 4, tier 2 is level 5 through 10, tier 3 is level 11 through 16, and tier 4 is level 17 through level 20. Choosing which tier you want to start your campaign in and where roughly you want to end it will determine the types of encounters and how you should plan those encounters and the adventure itself. Monsters you might want to choose will have to be an appropriate difficulty. Otherwise, you can, homebrew and make a lot of tweaks to them, which is fine if you're willing to do that. And it's fairly easy, but you should decide the tier first and then what monsters might come in that tier after. The real question is just how big of a big bad evil guy do you want your big bad evil guy to be? I said big bad evil guy a lot, I know. For tier 1 of play, levels 1 through 5, having your campaign set in one small region is more than enough. Monsters in this tier range are fairly generic, so you might want to spice them up, giving them some legendary actions and maybe a couple of new abilities. Or you could downscale higher level monsters. Tier 2, party will likely travel to the wider region, and they might get access to some interesting levels of magic that could create for amazing stories. They definitely become heroes here, known heroes, which will definitely make for some more interesting roleplay due to their fame and fortune. Tier 3 is where players' abilities and power gain starts to absolutely skyrocket. It can be amazing fun with some of the abilities that your players have access to in this tier. However, combat encounters become much more difficult to balance because your players have access to so many abilities, and when you're throwing difficult monsters at them, they'll either wipe the floor with it or they won't have enough abilities to deal with it, and it can be very difficult to balance properly at these higher levels, especially when they have access to magic items. But that's not to say that this tier is extremely fun and interesting. Players have a multitude of very, very interesting solutions to a lot of problems that you can throw at them. This means as a DM, you can have some extreme fun by picking those high-level monsters that you never get to run, throw them at the party and see how they deal with it. Another interesting thing that happens in this tier is players start to gain power, enough power to perhaps even travel to other planes of existence. And lastly is tier 4, and if you ever make a campaign starting in tier 4, dear God, I wish you luck. You've got some absolute work cut out for you. Your players already have access to all the spells they'll probably ever need throughout the entirety of the campaign, even though you've just started. They'll probably have multiple magic items, access to different factions, ways to get from A to B that you could never imagine or prepare for. This is the point where they can take down ancient dragons, purple worms, demi-liches, liches, princes of the apocalypse, and many other foes that seem practically impossible for almost every other group that you've probably ever played in. My only piece of advice for starting a campaign in this tier range is just have fun. Just have as much fun as you can as a DM. And if you didn't start to this tier, but you got to this tier starting in tier 1 or tier 2, then you've already had an absolutely epic and amazing adventure so far. That leads me into the 5th way you could decide your campaign, which is with planes of existence. Decide where you might end up going and what planes you'd like to travel to. I know a lot of my players really want to visit the Feywild, but they don't want to have a whole campaign set there the entire time. So allowing them ways to get to different planes of existence, say the Shadowfell, Astral Sea, the Prime Material Plane, obviously traveling to Plane of the Gods, or the Underworld and traveling to Hell. If you've got an interesting way to incorporate traveling through all these different places without having to have your players have access to extreme levels of magic, perhaps they get teleported there, or they have scrolls that let them get there, or portals just happen to be opening up all over the material plane that they travel through and they have to try and close from the other side and get back. Or maybe it's even the big bad evil guy himself helping the party go through these different planes. This kind of travel is fairly different to linear on-land travel in the material plane, in such that you can create epic worlds that are vastly different to anything in the prime material plane or the real world. You can have all the monsters that you ever wanted and thematically place them in each realm, allowing you to change up the feel and the dynamic of how your campaign exists from one session to another. Well, maybe not session, but one adventure to the next. This really can make a good shift in mood, and especially when you visit the Fey realm, you can make it a lot more silly and lighthearted. But you know who inhabit these planes of existence? NPCs. Let's talk about making some of those.